Chato.
Alexandra, let's. Shumani mambo, Dagetola, Vijay. Dagi, sorry. Hello, Alexandra.
I chose on Shivare.
Mare.
Chato.
Mitik Matogimano.
Tonight song was Jaka.
Shall we start?
That's the Ningozisha.
Okay.
The Nate not so name at Sema court usually that they're on Tandayanjoti called Chijuya.
So, in our previous classes, we have covered already the sevenfold division of mind to some extent. I would like to go over that a little bit again today.
That's the Tanda di Consacho depth Jacho Tago Nasarta Maluiju Patsamingo was in it in Jandua.
So in the book by His Holiness, if you have this, Geshe is teaching the science and philosophy in the Indian Buddhist classics, the second volume. And we are in the chapter which deals about valid cognition and mistaken consciousness. Valid and mistaken consciousness. And there's a quote by His Holiness in which he says that valid cognition is defined to be a non-deceptive cognition. It's on page, I have the ebook. In the ebook, it's page 96. I don't know if it matches the hardcover.
Last, Tani, Tanda Tama Telcert, Mulu Jupazi de Atelshia, Guba Cario Resina, Coxert Zediatu, Cheshi to Sama Mares in Itishi Vichetres.
Casetato Milo?
Certa Maluata, Corondino de Jacin Mandro, Tiny Gizer, Certa Jimupano, Cheshi Tama in Bacho Picheres, Cheshi to Samareves in Amares, Sonsa. Cheshi to Yanjo Yanjo Topore, Samaina, Certa Topore Sonsa, Cheshi Samain by Chapicheta, Certa Mupares.
Cheshi. Cheshi Sapamare.
Samamares.
And within the sevenfold division of mind, we have first of all, the direct perception, and then the third one in that enumeration is the subsequent cognizer. Both are valid cognizers. But as valid cognition is also defined as Sadhumilua, so new and incontrovertible, or new and incontrovertible. Sadhumilua, or Milua unmistaken. So both can be, both are unmistaken, but the subsequent cognizer is not new. It doesn't recognize its object newly.
Merlovaziatiatu, Shiba Mombochikananico, Merlovaziti, 2 years topati, Tonkechi in Gorezeondi, Yerkyo Tetsum Loshi Nalamangi, that's what Samaimba Pachendo Gores. Merloat.
Milua. Sama Miluare.
And Samat Merlua in Sonsa, Yerkyo Samamari, Tetsum Samamari, Loshi Samamari, Nalamangi Samamares in Tetso, Maimba Hakondogres.
And a Geshe young Zimamara.
Cheshi the Tanda Sartazia to Cheson Koi.
Not Geshe, a Jipak.
Jipotare. Merloazia to Yerkyo Tetsum Loshi Nalamangi Shi.
So we have the correctly assuming consciousness, the non-discerning direct perception, and doubt and wrong consciousness that are not valid cognitions or consciousnesses.
Last, Tajukpa Lavores, Jukpa Zeticam di She Teleba Pizama Teleson, Lochi Yangore Mato, Zundrao, Kanzandrao, Tenji Shea Yomaris, Kitanchina, Kivatsama, Jatsama, Shipatamazini, Shesoyore, the Cam de Shipatama Yangores.
Yeah, certainly. So, a valid cognizer, yes, defined, we can also say as a awareness or consciousness that is new and incontrovertible, new and unmistaken. And although they are valid objects that come up in the text, because it's valid persons and valid sounds and then consciousness. Here in this context, we talk only about valid consciousnesses. Yeah, but to just give an example what these other types of valid cognizers or valid objects, as it were, let's say. refer to the valid person would refer to an enlightened Buddha who is unmistaken in working for other sentient beings.
아니 자참마제디티 상제 송도 좀 시야 소파 닐 자포시아 타타레데오 저 자참마제니 시데요레.
And then valid sound would be the Buddha's teachings.
이나 감들 시바참마마토 사르타말루이 죽바지 연고레 뭔가 단다 감디 참말라 상제 샤티아타 바탄 단다 상제 송도 좀 자세.
Yeah, so but as here as we talk about the valid cognition, that is an awareness or an consciousness that is new and unmistaken. We literally talk. We don't talk about the valid persons or the valid sound, but about valid consciousness only.
Tandri imbatata pati chuki chapi tsama namdre gnana tsama lame chanshi paze ato mashi tonje sarche kyanze ni da tsikunga mni yores ngama tege tsama ze at mrlwa imbata chima tege tsama ze at sarto imbachi songo yores.
And there's there's a quote by Dhammakirti from his exposition of valid cognition, which reads, "Valid cognition is non-deceptive cognition. Regarding its object's ability to perform a function, it is non-deceptive, and it also reveals an object not known before."
Last tandri ta te tandri ge chami nawja sha ta kasang ngema ge lobse na ne chi je te si je zena aso namba ge chumta ma je yo pi na ni chumta oma ta so res kama oma tangje wa ze ya chi ur ko so ge chamma ta li ja to man rawa te yo res.
As a little bit touched on in the previous classes, there we find some differences within these four, generally speaking, four tenet systems. The ani ngatsu de wala dupta wokma kola keche siguro.
No, tambi no cha du.
Yeah.
Chumta ka ni kan du pati dawa ndo certa ni ka yore ta chumta oma tso chena tai kishia no je tsema ta sar to to gore pati chuja ka son. Ta pati dai loka chi son yore.
In the Umatagi
pati dawa umatangi warwa.
But yeah, so we find differences in these four tenet systems. So the Prasangika Madhyamika view is somewhat different from the lower school's views.
Tsamala quicker son is Tsamala sart to achi ngo maris Kurokan to goya tata to sonate Tsamares.
Yeah, so according to the Prasangika Madhyamika view, for something to be valid cognized, it doesn't necessarily need to be new. It needs to be what's the word here? Non-deceptive. Non-deceptive.
Sonza ta jumta woma ta tso chena nga tso yuki nga tso chatsani go lor deng na le tsema ka tse ja ki ore zena ngosam da jipa ni ka ma to tsema ja yo mares.
So according to the lower schools, there is ngosam da jipa.
Ngosam da jipa ni la tsema ja yo.
Okay, so according to the lower schools, they assert that only direct perceptions and inferential cognizers are valid cognizers or cognitions. And the other types of these sevenfold division of mind, they are not valid cognizers.
Jambangato pena jashi yerkyo nalamangi tesum loshi ter ngatala tsama tsawani ni ja mere.
And so the other five, the subsequent cognizers, correctly assuming consciousness, non-discerning, direct perception, doubt, and wrong consciousnesses, they're all non-valid, according to the law schools.
Yenayang, ta pade tanju ilula china, tigang le chashi te yang ya ngosam jipa chashi samga le tsamaja yores.
Whereas the higher schools, so the Prasangika Madhyamika, say that the first three types are valid cognizers, the direct perception, inferential cognizers, and also the subsequent cognizers.
Yenayang, ngosam de la jipa ta tan chashi tsama cha de ores pa de dailila.
Ngonsum dang?
Ngosam mare jipa tan chashi.
Yeah.
Tsama cha de ore.
Tsangma.
Ngosam da jipa yena tsama imbi kyawre.
Ngonsum yena?
Ngosam mare jipa ta chashi re ta ngosam ma cha.
So jipa dang chashi yena?
Tsama imbi kyawre pa de.
So for the higher schools, and Dhammakirti is one of the scholars of that school, they say that whatever is an inferential cognizer or subsequent cognizer, they necessarily need to be valid cognizers.
Yana tanda tumta oma chena tsama ina sarto yingo sonza ngonsam ina yang tombo tonke tamanga jima yanjo tonke tso tsama jakmari jipa ina yang tombo tonke tamato jima tonke tsama jakmari chashi jima tonke zonza tsama kyoni jaki me sonza ngonsam jipa ni la yang tombo ni tamato tsama jayo mares.
So whereas the lower schools say that only the first moment of the perception, of the direct perception, and the first moment of an inferential cognizer, they are valid. All the subsequent moments, they are not valid cognizers anymore. And subsequent cognizers, as they are not, as they are subsequent cognizer, not the first moment of a perception, they are not, according to the lower schools, are not valid cognizers.
Tani matsa penanga renda deptangi ten tombo tongi kablingi tongi mushi ta tsama jagare tesongi katsen tona ta tsole tsama jakamari cheshi zeati nandro jare inaje ancho koya jat sore toma koya ta cheshi re tsama re mato ni pasamba katse kona jip na ching cheshi chandro re tsama jayo mare.
So according to these schools, they say, the lower schools, then they say when I see this book now for the second or third or fourth time, and I've seen that before, it's not a valid cognition because it's not new. Because I've seen that before, and the same applies to sound that we hear another time. I mean, which we have heard before. It's not a new perception. That's why, as per definition, it's not a valid cognition.
Tatani, tandi sonza tsami tuanda tandi rendorita. Tsama maimbazi tsama jiblozi ni tanga so di lori ni nga tsama ta tsama gulozi di tele lihla sar rang rai la sertamelo maimbi rupazi gasi zi gerjati tani tsama maimbi lo chatsare.
And then whatever non-valid perceptions are they're fairly easy to understand then, because they're the very opposite of valid cognizers. So anything that is not newly or not a mind or an awareness or cognition that perceives something newly and is not something that is not deceptive.
So nema lori dangananga lori chama ngata tsama maimbi shipa jagore.
Kaza?
Lori dangananga chama ngata tsama maimbi shipa jagore.
Chimanga.
Jashi Nalamangi Yakyo Tesum Loshi Ted Natal Samamai Bishipa Jagore.
Duptama Wokma.
No, Chundawama.
So again, according to the lower schools, then the last 5 out of these 7-fold division of mind, the subsequent cognizer is correctly assuming consciousness, non-discerning, direct perception, doubting consciousness, and wrong consciousness. They're all non-valid cognizers.
Sonza tanga tsutini ma jamba janda samlochik tani yonda pena cheshi tawta tsama maindi karrezeti cheshi korogu yertala merlawari teorita sarto chadeo mari sonza tsama mari.
So subsequent cognizers, for example, they are unmistaken, but they don't perceive an object newly. That's why, as per their definition, it's not a valid cognizer.
Ani shipa mosum jipa cheshi yerkyo tawla samlo tana yerkyo zeyati ko tindichi rezini hamba gyamni so yendondo chede gorumga so sawlu nana te yengi choni hako yo mari te sonza ko sarte yamari sarte merlawazi yerkoro toko yo mari sonza tsama chak mari melwa maindi ko shingi yo mara.
Yeah. And also correct assuming consciousness doesn't really ascertain the object properly. It's just an assumption. It might be correct, but one doesn't really know. One's not sure. One just assumes something, which is by accident correct. So in that sense, it's not something new and undeceptive.
Tani tetsomre teli tetsako tetsomze te yinna manna ayina mayina sambi topa zade ni lo chinzonza yert tote yo mari sonza.
And likewise, with doubt, when we are in doubt of something, thinking, it might be this or that, we likewise don't really understand or ascertain the object. And then again, it doesn't fulfill the definition of being a valid cognizer.
Ani nala mangizi de ko yerta rapper pechinanga yoreta tonda ngito yo mari ngatsonge man nala mangi shaimba. So Pichan Rochi that is a rich shade in Amsholchi Data Code am Gotonda Kunikoma, so the Jal Nala Mangi Chanson, the Quality Machayo Mari, your doctor Mari.
And then also something that, that our senses perceive, but we don't ascertain it. Say when we watch a movie, we're so immersed in that movie, but then at the same time there's some background noise. We don't we don't consciously perceive it, or ascertain the object. And again, it doesn't fulfill the definition of being valid.
Then Loshina Telila Sari, Loshi Zedia Peti, Yerti Choni Hamakoni, Peti Jachaja non Trishon Doing Shipatro, Carbola Marbons in Serbol, Mombos Deni, Tendi Jimbol Tunduns and Peti non Trishon Doing the Sonsa, Tendi Samama but think Pare.
And then wrong consciousness is fairly easy. It's just being very wrong. Then we see something or believe something to be white while it is blue, or red while it is green, or whatever. Yeah.
Sonsa ta Samama in battle Lori Dungan Chimanga Tenji in Bata Timbe Chetogre, Bahakotogre.
So that way we can understand that these last 5 out of these list of 7 types of mind, as it were, are not valid cognizers.
And in Abdichoso Jan Vikablan, the Drigo Samata Yuki Lori Dungan Mosam Yili Kapar Karandu, Samata, Nipa Jipoli Kapar Karandu, Samata, Sambacheshi Kapar Karandu, Tendi Moderni shot at any 20 parts of Durtena, then Lori Kandrot on the Yapungia, Pendochimboyori.
And if you when you study this topic more in depth, then if you compare or think of all these possibilities between a valid cognition and inference, or what's the difference between valid cognizers and subsequent cognizers and so forth, then you will really get a good understanding of the whole topic of logic or mind and awareness. Shall I go a little bit into this into these different possibilities between? Yeah,
Sonsa Langazo Pena Lori Danganaga Tombo Mosam the Tanka Tamatingi Langazo Chitsigi till Mershetsayore. Mosam Tansemani.
Yeah, so between a direct perception and valid cognition, there are 4 possibilities.
Perna Tamayana Mosam Yangores in a Gomari.
Whatever Zemayina
Mosam Yangor. No, Yimbi Ikavs in a Kavmari.
Gonzamina, Zemayina.
Samaina Mosam.
Zemayina Gonzama in
Karja.
Oh, this one. So whatever is a valid cognizer doesn't necessarily be direct perception. For example, the inference cognizer.
Oh, then Mosam Yena Tamayin Gorezena.
So whatever is a direct perception doesn't need to be direct, doesn't need to be valid.
Pena Nimushit Mosam Radio, Neteri Dem Tongeta, Mosam Reta, the Tamari Deoma, Geshe Chadi.
The ring. So, for example, when I see the book now, which I have seen before, it's a direct perception, but it's not valid because it's not new.
Mosam Reta, Samamari, Kosoma.
Did you understand that? Semayina Gunzumare. Semayina Gunzumare.
Tobandu. Mosamare, Nin Tanda Dem Tonki to Mosamare. Samare. Samare. Sema Marezeko. Sema Sato in Goran, didn't give money Hakoyora. Geshe Chatari.
Tepti Gyoa Drosana, Kasangi Tep, and the Ringi Tep.
Tita Jaki Omar.
Sabadabo.
Tita Jai Omar, Tanda, Jungichani. Jungichani Giabore Mugatamata Cheshila, Kachikichani Jai Omar. Gunzeachi, the Kachizachi Nicheor. Jungichani Kondanam, the Chipa and Rapota, which you marley on Goratel, Gunzer.
It's the same.
Junda Kachik, they are think on the checker.
So the thing is, that when I see the book here, it's a direct perception, but not a valid perception, because as to the definition, for something to be valid or valid perception, it needs to be newly, and undeceptive. It's undeceptive, but not newly. But then Anita says, well, this today's book is not the same as yesterday's book has changed, right? No. And then Geshe said, no. But it's the same. We're not talking about this, but it's the same, yet nevertheless it's the same continuum, as it were, of that book. So that's why we can say, I've seen that book. Wow.
La position at Ngani research to Moshiba Arezena. Mare Ngani Katsani washing Rezegro, Nemang washing Rezegro. Nemaka washing Nemangani 2 meas in a 2 yore.
Tu yore.
Ka tu yore ngema cho tu ya te me kire sa ringa tu ke te me kire ngani tiri sa te tu ni ta choro na shi na ngani sa te tu ni cha sa ro. Te ma ro. Ngani ngema tu ringa ni ngo sing yo ro. Ngani ngo sing yo ro. Ta ngani na sa te tu ari ngema ngo mi shi la ge tiri te sa to ja na.
We all today meet for a second or third or whatever time, right? So before, when we met for the very first time, that is different. We haven't before that we had never met before, but as we have met each other before, we meet today, but not not newly or not for the first time.
So de kachi kun jero ta nga chu mi chon jero ro ngan jero ro gore ta ku jin de ma le on so sa jin la te ni sama ta cha shi ting go ni jan ni ro gore nge ma tu sa na ta ro ta ji ma tu ti an jo tu re ma to sa to ma re zin ni ro go gore ma to te re ma re jun se at da bon ro chi ma le on gora.
Okay, so these, I mean, you've changed, we all have changed. We change moment by moment, so that's the book. But nevertheless, it's the same continuum or continuity of that book. So it's why I can say I've seen that before.
So
therefore, the book that I see today is a subsequent cognition, not a valid cognition.
Tanda imukshita ngosam re deore yore ngosam re deore Geshe re de sonsa tsama mari ta ngosam yella Geshe main ke chik ta mari tsama main ke chik ta tsama yella ngosam main ke ni ja sa son.
So now we have two out of these possibilities between valid cognition and direct perception. Something that is a valid cognition doesn't necessarily need to be a direct perception, and something which is a direct perception doesn't necessarily need to be a valid cognition.
Ta nika inke de karzidingen de dep tange matin tombon tombi mushit chigora.
Yeah.
What the tsamaya re tango samya re.
Yeah, and so something which is both a valid cognition and a direct perception would be, would have been the time or the day that I saw that book for the very first time. That was a direct perception as well as a valid cognition.
Well, te sonsa ta nika main ken loshi zia ta nga so lori dangan nga tama loshi zia ta ja chondo.
And for example, something that is neither valid cognition and or direct perception would be, for example, the last one out of these 7, the wrong consciousness.
Well, sonsa tandi measure zia tandi chi zia ore tanda masam zia ta tandi ore ta tari mambo ji nyama shil tsde na nga chongo na kero.
Likewise, there are also 3 possibilities between, 2, say, objects, as it were, or consciousnesses. But if I go into too much depth, we all get a headache. Oh. Maybe at a later stage.
Ni chemba chugyo chugpa ti nangata jabatre trashi ta mantra vishipal nroye.
Okay, so then as a next point in the book, we are now in the ebook, it's page 99, the difference between mistaken and unmistaken cognition.
Tande nemal lori danga tamal loshi ziachin rote tandin kal trashi ziachi leore ta so tets chabarchi yo sonza tombonga son trashi tungo trochegi.
So we said earlier, the last one out of these 7-fold division of mind is the wrong consciousness. And now we're talking about mistaken versus unmistaken consciousness. And there's a bit of a difference between wrong consciousness and mistaken consciousness. So, I'm going to explain that a bit.
Kamdela, ta concern chokondi water ma, trashi kingo na ranga nayalan trevi jukpa wa lamdo, trashi zedea the cariziti lola. Yertel naye tanji ni zeachi chiayoriti nani nayelan no trishor sona teni trishi jade ore.
So here His Holiness says that there are two ways in which a cognition may be mistaken. It may be mistaken only with regard to its appearing object, or it may be mistaken with regard to its engaged object as well as its appearing object. Anikasa kasu?
Nayer tanji la niga nani nayelan terwalan trishi jakayore.
Okay, so a cognition that is mistaken with regard to its appearing object is a mistaken consciousness.
Ta nayer tanji kumara vi chapar kandishia gorezena pena ngaso nga tandwa ngar de deote ngar amatendri saulo dani loyil sharondi ni lapa nal tarangi ama sharingure sonza ti sherde de atel na yirla de gore.
So, for example, to explain appearing object, engaged object, or object of engagement, when I think of my mother, I have a mental image of my mother in my mind. That's an appearing object.
No, tindigo ni aman charvigo lotel na yirtan jiyo ni opino ni lapa na len char de amatel na yirtan amangoni tel jiyo lagre.
So the mental image that I have in my mind of my mother is an appearing object, but my actual mother is the object of engagement or the engaged object.
Sonsangi lapanal char de tel amandji char de sonsati amare me sonsa telen char de sonsa nailen churala gore. Me amal saulo tandi ting ni lapanal char de amat amangoni cha de o mare sonsa telen chur sonsa nailen churala gore. The nairo.
And as the mental image that I have in my mind of my mother is not my actual mother, the cognition, it's mistaken with regard to the appearing object because it's just a mental image. It's not the real mother. But obviously I'm aware that this is not my real mother. So I'm not. So the cognition is mistaken with regard to the appearing object, but not with regard to the engaged object.
Saulo nal shardeg amandao chi shardea tel natsun tseni jongonal tel tonkela de gore.
And that it's a mental image. The picture that we have in our mind from our mother, for example, it's referred to as a mental image.
Sonsa tel teni ama to de at natsu nachu peg nal tendi shang natsu chichi chinjo ti takpa chi de kel tani ni takpa tel kinjo ti ni takpa lizam de ore kel lakpa koran chang mar ta ni chizam yore zena yore zeni shiana ni ama ngoni tat main ke naro saulu nanga amanda wochile teni ama ngoni tat to atendi chikpe jagandu hago son
Kasa mare
takpa la jeni chichi ra chil lakpa choni tiyo mar ta ni chichi ro yore ro ki la takpa chi gyang takpa de zemni ro de chichi ro yore yore chil lakpa choni change mara o te na jinga so ama koron le choni nrewa che mato ni ami tonke la tene ama hakon rogo reze peten di jakandu koson
all these examples. I mean, the example here is given. I can go for a walk with a dog on the lead, but I'm not touching the actual dog. And likewise, I can have a mental image in my mind, but it's not the real mother, right? So that
touching the actual mother.
ni tonke ta takpa ni ta chipare ama ta kete ni chipare nge ama tara tel tini to jogo yoreta ama korol ngus tik to yo mar ti barul tonke kaja nge khel ngus tik yo mar ti baru takpa te yongore tin ro chi pe jandu ko de ki e yon sam da telin go nyori ta so
usually I think just make it more difficult.
The meaning general.
So that's kind of the illustration. Without touching the dog, but I have the dog on the lead. Like kasa di ki hako to kyore.
Chichi to yore.
We can.
Je to kele tini ama to yore. Ngus sha ta ama kyuni sha yo mare. Ndago chi ma.
By means of the meaning generality, we can, understand or, know our mother.
What the Richland Trishi they were is all that Trishi they at Rachin Trosare. Not so Tonjapo and Richi Sharni Corla Moni the Sharmato Sons and Rabotel and Church they was on Trishi lab they were. Tell us 9 years they were 9 years and
So as the mind or the mind that is mistaken with regard to the appearing object, which is only resembling the actual object. And in a sense, the mind is mistaken with regard to the appearing object. It's a mistaken consciousness.
The non conscious cochina ponza topa jando, not so pamba saulo tante in the jando, teaching per not so pamba saulo tante ni la panal pambanda which is shagre, talenture degree, and until tini pamba money to tonjo, Gila mancha, noil and cherwaze were.
His always in the book gives the example of, of a pot, we can have a mental image, or we can think, of a pot in our minds, which is the mental image. And we always, in a sense, because it's not the real pot, we are mistaken with regard to that object, the appearing object, but we understand, what a real pod is, what it refers to. So we are not mistaken with regard to the engaged object.
Machine Ruchikan Tavikabla, Muk Devlatana Deptani Mushiti, Noyel radio and Gian radio little, as a Tobanajish Rakabarchayomar.
Casa?
Mukishipandowich, Mosam radio or Mushita. Mosam Ruchika Yerla Tavicena. We devil depth nair and Gian remato, Naitangi Musi Locacio Mar, Tagital Locaces, Amatangi, Amandao, Naires, Tenajum Mosam Latiniciayo Mare.
So, with regard to direct perception, for example, direct perception, you're seeing something with the eyes directly. There is no difference between the appearing object and the engaged object. It's both the book that we are directly seeing with our eyes. Before, with regard to the mental consciousness, we had this differentiation between the appearing object, the mental image, and then the actual person or the actual object outside. But here, with regard to the sense perception, here in this case, seeing the book with our eyes, the book here in front of us is both the appearing object and the engaged object.
Then he also not so topa kind but the Saulo donkey, topa kind but Nail and Churn Kitchumato Martin Gijayo.
Because a topi?
Topa kind but Kata topa top, topa kind but Nail and Churn Kitchen, Trishi in Kitchumato, Mantrishi Bacunija Mary.
Yeah, so any conceptual consciousness is always mistaken, is always a mistaken consciousness.
Carries in a king share there at the Koromai Kitchi Sharing Gora.
Because because any concept we have, it all relates to or is connected with a mental image, right? Because we, 20, it's a mental image.
Tendraboji Shardiatal 20 Lagro. Hotel Shari de Gonsalta Contrashi. Yana, Coson Trishina, Loshi, Tachi, Ne Amantonke, the Loshi Charsons in a Pambantonke, the Loshi Charsons, the Loshi Chakayoma, Lori Dangatama, Loshi, the Chakayoris, and the Chakayomari.
Yeah. So although it's a mistaken consciousness, it's nevertheless it's not a wrong consciousness. But because a wrong consciousness needs to be mistaken with regard to the object of engagement or the engaged object, here in this case, in our example, the mother.
Loshia Chakayorin, Trishia Chate Yorita, Aman Zimbi Topata, Trishimato, Loshi Chakayo, Maritanji Cabariore. Carmombo's getting
right.
Nika Chate.
Yeah.
Aman Zagi Topata, Trishimato, Loshi Chakayo Mari.
Yeah. So something which is both a mistaken consciousness and a wrong consciousness would be perceiving snow mountain, white snow mountains as blue. That would be being mistaken with regard to the appearing object as well as the engaged object. But coming back to the example of having a mental image of the mother, that's only did I say it correctly? Perceiving white snow mountains as blue is both a wrong consciousness and mistaken consciousness, whereas the mental image of the mother is only a wrong consciousness. I mean, a mistaken consciousness, but not a wrong consciousness.
What Sonsata, Trishita Loshi Cabarte Cheto Sonat, Nichigato, National Naidanji is in Cabercini, and the 9G wasn't sonnet, she is someone Gioreta. That was your watching with Tata Rio and Amina Hakumi. Nationalke, Trishita Loshinika Lilapon Caberce Jagari, Trishi my Nile and Trumach Tajari, Loshi my Gil and Trumach Tatini Rojacari, so that 9G, you're watching on Trosona, Queen Caberce Lila Chandra.
This joporation. How goes in this joporation?
Nile Tanjir Caberce Sona, Tan Trishita Loshi Caberce Lila Chandra. Gil Lanterna, Loshi, Nile Lanterna, Trishi, Nika Lanterna, Nika Chandra.
So if one has a good understanding of, these appearing objects and engaged objects and being mistaken with regard to them, then one will also understand, the difference between a mistaken and a wrong consciousness.
Tatani, Pachindik Songo, Tatani, Rangas Naila Mantri Shipa Jati or Mantri Shipa Lilagdo. Tachi Ranga Naila and Trivishipa, the only Tatiligas, Ranga Naila Mantri Rupat, Mantri Shipari. Trashita Mantri Shipa Shigora.
And then, the very opposite, like an unmistaken consciousness would be the opposite, not being mistaken with regard to an appearing object.
아니 만트리 시바들 가서 유키를 어다 딱엔 트리 시바들 유키 로르 등가 나는 트리 시바자 사카세 요레제나 지팡 트리 시바리
Jipak. So from within this sevenfold division of mind, when we look at what are so what are mistaken consciousnesses, jipak. All inferential cognizers are necessarily mistaken consciousnesses. Because inferential cognizers are necessarily, they're only conceptual. And also, correctly assuming consciousness. So correctly assuming consciousnesses are also necessarily mistaken. And doubt is also necessarily mistaken. So and all wrong consciousnesses are also necessarily mistaken consciousnesses. Tulsi Maingen. Nangamani yang mitu
Mantri Shipari. Na dere
and all direct perceptions and the non-discerning direct perception, when we perceive something is, perceived but not ascertained. When we watching movie and then there is some sound, we hear it, but we're not aware of it really. So these two are non-mistaken.
Di parutal katal ha de orezina cheshitala cheshinke da mainke nika yosat cheshitri.
So subsequent cognizers can be both. They can be mistaken and unmistaken.
Karazeti cheshitala ngosam yinke ayore jipa yinke ayore jipa yinke kain bat and cheshitri ngosam yinke kain bat mantri shipari. Cheshi langaso takin nem dem toy mushit cheshi jaso. Te mantri shipari. Teni jipaka chini pai nange saulo tani tonke chiora penange satal nemanga so te jaimba satal tini lamshia chiora. Satas in a map. Maple tani langashia chiora. Langashia te jipar tal tengur. Tenji tombo nge satal tani langashinjoti jipat samari. Ti jili anjo satate nema langa te anjo ta ondi cheshi re. Te so cheshi anre la cheshi anre.
So subsequent cognizers chisi yina dene ngunsum dang jipak kasa
ta cheshi la ngunsum yora ngunsum cheshi yora ngunsum cheshi to mantri shiba.
Okay, so subsequent cognizers can be direct perceptions which are unmistaken.
Ani jipa cheshi to cheshi.
And inferential cognizers. Kasa? And inferential cognizers that are also subsequent cognizers, they are mistaken.
Nipa so re kani yuki dumbat so ta ya ma chigni chik ta so ya po chik to so na jo so shi sare te shata chik ma to ne tanda tezngo sig me bitare pena chashin ji na yuku lori dang tombo teren to nipa teren to samba teren to toram chini tani te ya ma chik ta so ta shashina lori shi sare so ja ma shi na tanda lori ngo ma bitare.
Anyway, if you have a good understanding of that, you can go, and be very clear about which of these sevenfold or seven types of mind are either mistaken or non-mistaken, then you have understood lorik, then you have understood mind and awareness.
Sonzatni chiktaroshida tatanda tela tashik to mantri shipa inke to mosam down ala mangi nitare mantri shipa tanda tashi to mantri shipa zajor mantri shipa inye to mosam down ala mangi nire.
Okay, so and then coming back to unmistaken consciousness, that these are all direct perceptions and those consciousnesses to which, or this non-discerning direct perceptions.
Geshe Lharampa Rangrig Dorje Sonam Loshi Tandakar Yerkyo Jipa ko jetare Jipa Yerkyo Tetsom Loshi jetare Geshe Lharampa
Mistaken consciousnesses are all inferential cognizers, correctly assuming consciousnesses, doubt and wrong consciousness. So, and subsequent cognizers can be both mistaken and unmistaken. Yeah, so but when you have a look at that book and read His Holiness's explanation, it will become clearer and clearer, you will understand. And a little bit further down on that same page, still within the chapter of mistaken and unmistaken consciousnesses or cognition, there are. It's said that there are different. What does it say? It says a mistaken cognition may be mistaken regarding its object due to the influence of either two causes. And Geshe will explain that. Yeah, so there is on the one hand side there is the temporary cause of error and a deeper cause of error.
Tata churgistin la yo paziachi or churgistin la yo pazidia consancho candicha zona nazo dawani nanke mushi javrabziat nasan roji sare mushile mugawambol kyondo jini dawani jentoni tenditala churgistin la yo pazidu. Tibetan. That was the basis. Yeah. Rasoi.
Yes. So one example. The take it to. So and there are four different types of temporary causes of error, and the first example given here is when it's a non-conceptual cognition with a temporary cause of error in the basis of the visual cognition. So so the example here is given when someone's eyes is affected by a disease and the person sees two moons. That would be one of these. The first example.
The carcerezena, also wantel kyunjini tentongo yo son sancher gisten la yo pazeti giking mandrini shipatan chasonare.
Yeah, so because of a fault in the eye, the consciousness or perception can be mistaken.
Ni patalan chergi yer la yo paziatrin, chergi yer la yo pazena puki yer ke giking goni chendroatre, te lonkon koreat la pejan, the lonkon cordating also corcor chintongo, corcor re deo resina reo marta, corcor chinton de word, the ku yer giking as on chasonare.
And then the second example here is a temporary cause of error in the object that we see. And the example given is that when it's very hot and we have the fan on very quickly, and it appears to be round, but it is not. So it's in a sense a fault in the object.
Di shoni ngaro shoni kyonda chekan yo marte yuki tun korean yoak so yuki chal kyon so that chergi yer la yo pala ore.
Yeah, so there's no fault with the person perceiving the fan, but the error, as it were, is with the object.
And then sambatel chergi la yo pazing dun chergi la yo patanga so baba joan ro ta mota nal juan ro tan shu mota juyon na jili nan ro ta tan juyon di chi loga zendo shimbon zendo so ya jungjo ching tongore what tel chergi ni la yo pazide de tel laure.
And then the third error mentioned here is in the location. That, for example, when we are driving in a car or sitting in a train, and then outside we see trees moving past us very quickly, which is not the case.
Then chergianila yo palagua is carries the Arnesagan Mota Yenari, Jili Yenari, or Nesagan Sanital teaching at Cherson in Son Chergia Nila yo palaur.
Yeah, so we were sitting in in a car or in a train. But the landscape outside seems to be moving by so quickly. So in that sense, it's an error in the location.
Then tragedy tema takela yo patri tandi that's kachembo ze gore pena dina peja atle control shi chembo chawon pa sad so marbon ra to ani yores tragedy tema takela yo pare ze yores.
And then the fourth example given here is a fault or an error in the immediately preceding condition. That in the example is given that due to strong anger one may perceive things around as red.
That's what the one she would change it. That you should change in and so now you control on the partial controls as I meet the catch a young meet the chata, but Kati in a deposit deniro. Get and do put and control by Zojacres, Miss Account to catch a get the Pochi or Mari, catch a gay Pochi or Maritan, control Shichembo line on the partial committee catch a get the catch Zojacres, Ni same Gonalazina, so the same Gonan. Then I Dochandra Wakiona, so Chabakes and meet the catch a gay upon which is Zojacres, and reaching on your Marta Zoja. And Jim Chatondra Wakiona, partial Yondin that is Sochini, so the Churgetema. Temataki chepa latini yo pa joko tengi watani so lo tengi mombo zo yo reservoir so the kitchen what hondo
so it can be due to strong anger that we perceive others as 100% and always very bad, or we have a strong sense of attachment to someone and we see them in as 100% perfect, or we are having strong jealousy and get in that sense of what being envious, so towards the others. So these are all things that created by the mind, which then distorts the perception.
So control on the round, Yinchik so look at the taki the tanya to Comchachi, the rounds so taki tanjo, the control lamps on my jet to Tashi. Kinga Karchin Jumas on Sam the Pashol, Captitil, second Kashi knowledge, takes a Mandriwachimato, Jen Chachimbo Jab Johnny, Monchesachi Yomarta, Kin Rimbol, so Mandru Pachinia, Yota Sigro. Mambo Chite, second Kashi Nala Pashoni, takes a Mandru Pachining a control sheet, which is Lani Tachego. Did Hakos on the Lamson control my jail to Pepe and Tokore. Hakosoma.
Mishambati Kachachik
Kachachik Langal Dikachewa Latina control shoes on the Gacha Jagadina, Tenji shoe check. Now just also control on the Salo the Tanto gold. Do paint on the social. Sembachiboyon.
Anyway, it's usually the case that maybe another person for like a second or whatever, a few moments says something bad to us, which makes us so angry. But it's not that the person is 100% bad or whatever. But being aware of this, it already helps, and it's good to Kase Suzuki and it helps to calm our minds and make it more peaceful. Already knowing and understanding this, right?
Then in Korean Raw Korean Raw Magas and Tata Korean. Samlo Pachitan that she takes a passion for Kintes, a social market Pazo, but Hako, knock your Kishir. Sounds that I came and do some on the Lamson, so simple Kipongo, Judi and Golas, a quarto at it, tending the Yamanima, so Samlo Town in Nani, Korea, Pojapton, attending. As soon as you teach you, Omar. Yacha Yachalo Yang Tani Pasho, Saman Pasho Nichi or Makini, so Nani, Yavataya, the tuning based Chego Martik, Morish.
Normally, what we do, we are looking always outside, and finding faults in whatever other people or circumstances and whatnot. We are usually not looking within. But if we become more aware that, we, with our minds create a lot of, we can, perceive things in a certain way, we exaggerate. But being aware of that, helps us to become more, I'm thinking along these lines and being more and more aware will help us to calm our minds.
When a Michigan National Tupson, Nathan district shoe, Nagato contra shoes are. Contra shoes are the cars in Nasa Townsons in there. Nasa Kamanga to check out Tendichik house on a Yamashi Tendichik Nasa, Betty Chuni Mea Nemanaj Chasarita control, the news on the part Girimbo Loni Lo, some nine and Marcellus only did. The Marcellus only did dinner. John Rank hit the carriers in a John Rank hit the Sosori, Soso Natsata, Soso Simba Maki was Zoamato, Pashon and Chicanto Mar. Pashokotson Nokia at the detached Chigat, Chichena kama chikajik mer chapsari no pat. This all the time to mar lamps at the same engine, control chini getting what is so canit so canitin, Rojaco responds and then got in Jilla, Arco Pecho Tango at Rendusha.
If someone slaps us in the face, for example, you know, I mean, we have maybe some pain for a couple of minutes, but then, you know, the pain is over, but still, you know, we keep a grudge or hold a grudge in our minds. We get angry, you know, even sometimes for, you know, years or for our lifetime. Whereas the other person, you know, probably has quickly forgotten about it, but we hold that grudge. And he also dimutune.
Control no shit so don't tell me so
so but you know, by having that attitude and holding that grudge and being so angry for such a long time, you know, the only harm you know we're doing, I mean we are harming ourselves by doing that.
So seva yona control che yo mare mato so no gre mato pasol no mare
So seva yona
so seva yona so control che yo mare the pasol chano mare so gacha no gre
seva yona cuz it's
so seva yona so na ja the control che mate
kontu makina so pengero
pengere mangano pasol seva ni no mare so pengere control machena control che dena so no yamato yada ke pasol no pachesani control che de ora ina pasol tsipazani control che dena pasol chano mar pasol ha koroko mar no set so no.
Whereas if we, on the other hand, if we have, you know, loving kindness instead of anger, then we won't harm the other, and you know, it's also not harming us. But I mean, if you give rise to anger, it's us ourselves that we harm by doing that. Like,
tani tandan tree gestion the also so tanda yashendo pena niku kablan tree geshe ora niku kabs katanga to malam nalanda mandachi mide ndo ta so yon travarity kenda niku che yore niku kabs malam nalanda mandachi malam tang ndo ta so kanga trishir and tree gestion the niku che yore.
And then there are other forms of mistaken consciousness that you know, arise when we dream. You know, we can dream up all sorts of things. So mistaken consciousnesses.
Ani chantong ani sat so mang gi chojab de nin raw ta yon men jam da zani yo man chen nang jam da chong ta so ne ze to ki yon shipan cher de yore ten yong yore
or you know, we
so
can
sondu yong yore ze ko re konsa chong ten sondu
that you know, I mean, it's all said by His Holiness in this book, and he continues on to say that, or speak about, you know, drugs that, you know, people take, or you know, alcohol, which, you know, then are different substances that make, you know, the perception change or become mistaken.
So tani tan trishi ta ma tri shi pa ta parchi tondang ro chi tani chi re sha ta kyo son trishi ta lo shi ni ke kya par te ya po chi ja shi wa chi tani chwan ra yo tong bang so kama yendu chwan ra yo na chwa chi ta men nga so trishi ta lo shi ni ma sam chi ji ni tani ja ja pa.
Anyway, so that was a little explanation on mistaken and unmistaken consciousness, and also the difference between mistaken and wrong consciousness. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.
So mistaken consciousness is always wrong in regard to its appearing object, right?
Mistaken.
Drusheina, nangyula drupe kyak.
No, kyabi.
Lokshina,
No, jin chi kyapo.
Lokshina, nangyula.
Loshina no yin ji ni kan cher ro kyabi.
Nita drupe kyak.
No kyabi. Loshi re chati ni kan cher sare. Dan no trishi yin na Nair mato jilan chunke ta manchi ma manchi kya mari chunke yo chui kya mari jipak ta pena nga chu jipak sa man ro chi na nailan chur de go tan jilan chur yo mari jipak sa ma da tang za to pa ta wi na nailan chur de go jilan chur de go ten chi lo shi ni char.
So anyway, so it was just to clarify, so any mistaken consciousness is mistaken with regard to its appearing object, but a wrong consciousness is mistaken with regard to the appearing object as well as to the engaging object. And the
pechajana tanda jipak samati chishire ta loshimare.
So an inferential cognizer, Sana?
Iji patsamat, na yelan churkyan jiyela manchur.
Is it, yeah, so an inability to cognize is mistaken with regard to the appearing object, but not to with regard to its engaged object. Ani?
Ani dastakpan zimit tanzinde, na yelan jiyela manchurs.
And perceiving sound to be permanent is both mistaken with regard to the appearing object and also the engaged object. That's why perceiving sound to be permanent is a wrong consciousness.
Ori, tanda tetsa chigla, tanda chashi mantra vishipata, chamtaga yang chapar chigshia yore, tetsa jigona chichi. Tetsa shijaka. Chashi mantra vishipata, yataki nga su shia tsama te siliglan jikuyore zinam durde patan, cherchak mawatan, parche Roma rangye pala, namjo kyobi rangye pazaya chig chapar tetsa shia ور. Ate chemta kashigulugla tatan jikore, namji yonchak taiki nga su shia namji shia dekri. Yonchakla, nga su taki shia namjin chashi mantra vishipata garange. Ina atel manja sachigla, targir wazayata, sem zambatan, namjo kyobi rangye pazaya chigore. Kosoga, chirotonda chapazayata, Tanguita chirotonda chapamare, sem zambi chirotonda chapazayata, killing me sonsa, one sheet so and chashi illa dekri. Also mushing the devil tadinity and chashi illa dekri. Sem zambach. Pena sem zambata way na the devil tanda the devil tying mushit and chashi illa dekri. Testi gerta.
Because the same time, but it's a lot cheering.
Sem zambi need and the devil tying mushit and chashi illa taki on manjavachi yores.
Kaisena conso.
Then tombo che kali gerta, then kaisena zishio.
Anyway, so Geshe says that that there are differences in these different tenet schools, and then there are other than we have the Vaibhashika, the Sutra school, the mind only, and Madhyamika, and then there are certain subdivisions. But for example, the mind only or Chittamata school, Geshe says they would even say that that the eye consciousness perceiving the book is a mistaken consciousness.
Taking out so much wish in the only Tassenza, Koson in ton the Kandisha or is it the Netanga Tachi Jana to Mandavachi Yores on the Korea, Su Takishia Najin Koso Yanda, Manchesa Takishia Najin in Jori. Yanayo, Koso Karzit is Sentamberg, not so two times sim grangeres. Saulun and Chavats among the Chigan Yo Marilla wash. Sem ganal chawa samang chekang yom. Chatakin chagata yorat. Chawa teli mato yo maris.
Yeah.
Chaloli yo maris.
Yeah. Because normally it's the way it is being accepted as it was that we explained the way how we explained it before. But the mind only school, for example, they do not accept that phenomena exist externally, separate from the mind. They say everything appears, but it's an appearance within the mind, and yeah.
Sonsa ne kar ne devtal taundi devtawandu ngan mishbandanandu tini soso yo patan nanga yoreta tol soso nanga yo mare shipi ngo tsamang chigang yo mare zine senza mitani jishegor.
So what the mind only proponents assert is that like external phenomena such as the book appears to be existing externally outside of the mind, but in fact it is not the case. It's all within the mind, and we are mistaken in that regard, and that's why they say eye consciousness perceiving the book, to exist externally out there is mistaken.
Senza bi tomba nyete antigua ni kacha shiwore ngato tomba nyeze achiwa. Tomba zeate churorla chukan yo mari tomba res. Sama shipi danye tsamle samlu nal chawa tsam teli loxag ngato devzena ni samlu nal dev chagre tagaran debre tani chu machi na taran chagre ti samlu nal chawa te tsamato chirola me sonsa chiro ki tombi chani tomba nyeze ni semzambi tomba nye katanya tali jagore. Naging tomba ni shetan dan jagmari.
Tomba ni
Chelola kawayo mare Tomba yo mare devi yo ma me yo mare shipi danye savre samlu nal chawa tsam te savre.
That's also the way they explain emptiness, that everything although it appears to be external outside, it's nevertheless according to what they say, an appearance in the mind, everything we perceive is in the nature of mind, and that's the way they explain emptiness, which is different from the usual way it's been explained.
만주의 시바야.
마트르비시바 삼사부가
다 소소키우지 그 시바이는 추시 시바이 미캡제월에 다 상계의 남편으로다 또파야 아즌토니 단다 서로 양치메바 돈이 돈바니 돈이 니 나메바 돈아지니 만주의 시바레그레 뭔가서 이 삼로 참만 추시 미캡제니 셈자미텔라월
Die Tonglam Gutsugne.
다야 돈바니 돈이 돈바니 뭐선도 돈케트 저다 만주의 시바레 마도
Tongpani Nganzum Gutsugne.
되니 만주의 시바인 거
According to the proponents of the mind only school, all we ordinary beings, our perceptions, our consciousnesses are all mistaken. Only when someone has progressed on these paths and has achieved the path of seeing and has a direct realization into emptiness, then from then onwards, all the way up, then perception or consciousness becomes unmistaken or non-mistaken.
디 내전 뇌송기치마도와
남종모스의 말에 카레 남종모스
내전 뇌송기치마도와
남종모스도 만주의 시바레
마트르비시
소소키와 제크시바 참마 트위시바 자데워 Watene de chiri tatanda thanju ilila ya tili mandawa chi ore ta ti so zo so ta nge so jima shishen chushi ta mantra shi bi kol tumta ta so mandawa mombo chi share tanda senzam bi ja ta mandawa thanju ya lokha chi shigir
Now we have run out of time, but anyway, so that's what I wanted to cover today, and then I continue with a bit more on that because also the highest school, the Prasangika Madhyamika, again has a slightly different view on these things.
Continue
next time.
Yeah.
See you next time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
음악이 가서야